All right, let's get started here. If I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, my name is Holly Conrad Smith. I am one of the customer success managers here at Giraffe, and I have a background in construction estimating and development. So I'm really excited to bring you this webinar today. This is one of my favorite webinars to run. It's one of my favorite features of Giraffe, and I really think that once you all get a chance to dive in there and get familiar with analytics, that you're really going to enjoy it as well. So with that, let's get started here. So I have a little project that actually my colleague Adam created this project. It's really cool, so I thought it would be a fun one to use today for our presentation. And what we're going to do today is build a simple development proforma from scratch. So in doing that, you'll learn all of the different controls and different pieces and parts of Giraffe Analytics. And we'll also learn a little bit about how calculations in Giraffe work. And at the end, you'll get to see sort of what a basic analytics proforma might look like. And hopefully you'll be inspired to start inputting your own proforma information into Giraffe. So with that, what we're looking at on the screen here is a model that was created using all of Giraffe's typical drawing features, as well as our usages. And usages are really key in getting your Giraffe projects all set up correctly. So you can see here that these buildings all have lots of different colors. They have maybe different floor to floor heights. So even just visually, they look unique. And what's even more interesting to me as someone with a development background is not only are their visual properties different, but the actual mathematical assumptions about all of these different building types are unique as well. So if you've played around in Giraffe at all, you've probably used our drawing tools here at the top of the screen. And maybe you've gone to the buildings tool and you've seen a list of lots of different types of building typologies that you can start drawing with. So maybe I want to draw sort of an interestingly shaped amenity area. And when I draw that, you probably notice things like one, it's giving me the area of this shape. And two, my urban metrics, this is the default sort of analytical report in Giraffe, is starting to give me some outputs of what the gross building area, gross floor area, and net rentable areas are for all of the different building typologies in our project. As you are probably aware, things like GFA and net rentable are calculated using efficiencies. But looking just by clicking on this building and just looking in the sort of reporting areas that we're seeing on our Giraffe screen, it might not totally be clear where that efficiency value is coming from, right? So there's a lot of sort of I wouldn't say magic, but really helpful calculations going on in the background in Giraffe as you draw. And all of those calculations, those baselines and assumptions are stored in your projects, in your usages. So my biggest recommendation to anyone who's starting out in Giraffe is, start playing around and just drawing some things using the defaults that are in the project. But as soon as you start getting to the point where you're going to do an actual feasibility, you're going to start drawing something that represents a real project. Make sure you jump into your usage editor, which is here on the left-hand side, and it looks like a series of filters, and go through all of the usages that are important to you and update those settings, because you want the assumptions in your project to match the actual assumptions you want to make about the buildings you're designing, right? don't let the whatever defaults are in there drive any sort of decisions that you make. You want to make sure those decisions are based on real data, and that real data should be stored in your usages and your projects. So right now I've just opened up my usage editor, and the first thing I'm seeing here is it has opened by default to my residential usage. It's one of the first ones in my project. That's why it's opened there by default. And I can see all of the information here that's stored in my residential usage. It has an efficiency assigned. It's 80% efficient. It has a cell efficiency assigned, 72% cell efficient. The efficiency takes me to my gross floor, and my cell efficiency takes me to my net rentable. And then I've got other things like what is the floor to floor height. I can put in my unit sizes and mix. So maybe I actually want these units to all be a little bit larger, just based on what's typical in my area. I can put in my requirements for number of parking spaces and also my rent assumptions. So, in Philly, a studio is unfortunately a little bit more expensive now than what is stored in here. So I might just up these rents a little bit to reflect that. And as soon as I save those changes, those will all be written back into anything in this project that has that residential usage. So I'm talking this tower here has that residential usage. This little pie-shaped fun building here has that residential usage. So now all of those assumptions about efficiency and unit mix are included within these buildings and will be then drawn into our analytics for our calculations. So definitely take a run through all of those. You can switch which usage you're editing by clicking in the drop down. So if you want to edit your amenity assumptions or you want to edit your retail assumptions, pop in there and make those adjustments before you start building out your analytics calculations, because your calculations might look too high or too low based on whatever defaults are in your template if they don't match your real world assumptions. So taking from that, basically every calculation in Giraffe is taking the area of a geometry. So if I just draw a rectangle, this rectangle has no properties to it except where it's located on the globe and what size it is. So it's already, you can see, calculating the area, at least, of this rectangle. But as soon as I assign a usage to it, so maybe I assign the commercial usage to it, now this shape has not only an area, but because I'm telling Giraffe this is now a building type that represents a commercial building, it also has a number of levels, a height to those levels, and therefore the number of levels also contributes to the floor area of that building. So all of those calculations are kind of happening in the background. It's saying, okay, the floor plate for each of these is 11,320 square feet. I'm going to multiply that by the efficiency, and then I'm going to multiply that by the number of levels, and that's going to give me the GFA of this specific building. So just keep that in mind when we go and actually dive into analytics, but all of those calculations are being done semi-automatically in the background to help you out when you're building out your calculations, so that some of the more common calculations in real estate are already being done for you. Just trying to center this a little bit, and we can actually close the layer palette because we don't need that right now. Perfect. So we're not going to look very much at the urban metrics today. These are like defaults that Giraffe has kind of given to you to use as a starting point. These are pretty typical, measurements that might be useful for most development projects. But we all know that your secret sauce is what's important to your specific organization, whether you're doing affordable housing or you have a very specific market niche, or Maybe you're not building residential apartment buildings, maybe you're building life science, and things like the number of labs is really important. All of those things can be calculated using analytics, and that's where we're going to go today. So right below the urban tab icon here is a tab that looks like some math. That is your analytics tab. And when I click into that tab, if I didn't have any calculations in this project yet, it would prompt you with, do you want to use our metric template or our imperial template? And those templates would drop in some very generic sort of, again, like area calculations and maybe like a rental pro forma that is very back of the napkin. But what I typically like to do is start from scratch in that situation. It's good to get an idea of what calculations are possible, but you want to make sure you get your information into draft. So right here we have some sort of example calculations that are included in this specific project already. But what I'm going to do is create my own custom ones on another tab. So I'm going to click here where it says new tab, and I'm going to call this tab Proforma. Just click create and then pop over to that tab. So now you can see there's nothing on this tab. And that is great. We're going to start by adding some new things. So the first thing I want to do is add a category. And if we pop back over to our default tab, we'll see there's two categories here. One is called built form and yield, and one is called site and landscape. Categories are basically just groups of calculations that go together. It gives you a header and it lets you do some sort of subtotaling calculations within those categories. So the way I'm going to set up my pro forma is costs, incomes, expenses, and feasibility. So I'm going to just create 4 categories to start, knowing that that's where I'm going. So I'm going to click new category and call my first one costs, create. And then I'm going to add my other categories as well. Incomes, expenses, and feasibility. So now that I have these headings set up, I can start adding individual calculations into these headings. The first calculations that I'm going to do are my costs. The costs is a pretty straightforward run of calculations. So it's a really good place to start. So I'm going to just click on the plus here, and when I mouse over it, you can see it says add measure to costs. And this is going to open up your measure editor. We call them measures in Giraffe, but it's each individual calculation that you are adding to your analytics. It's your every line item in your pro forma report is a measure in Giraffe. So before we start building the actual calculation, we need to give this measure some information like a name, and the name is just how it will be displayed in the list of line items in your report. So give it a name that is decently descriptive. So something like hard costs is going to be pretty useful. And then you need to select a unit of measure for it. So in this case, my hard costs is going to be currency. So my unit will be currency. I want my precision for currency to be 2 decimal points, so I'm going to leave this at 2. And then once I have those things set up, I'm ready to start adding components. And components are how you tell analytics which properties from the model you want to reference in this specific calculation. So if you remember back to when I drew that rectangle and I applied a usage to it and it inherited all those properties, things like the floor to floor height, the number of levels, the efficiency, all of those individual properties of that shape are what I can reference here as components. So the first one that I'm going to pull in is actually my gross building area. And I'm going to do this in feet, not meters. But you have both options by default there. And then the way I calculate hard costs is to multiply my hard cost value times the gross building area. So I'm going to click add another component and then search for hard cost. And I can see that I have hard cost here as a property as well. If I want to check on what the hard cost value is that's saved into all of my usages, I can do that really quickly right from this editor. So instead of having to go back and open up my usage editor and go one by one through all of my usages, I can just click this edit property here, and it will show me every single usage in my project and what hard cost value is assigned to those usages. So this is a really fast way to just run through your project and get everything up to date, even as you're building your analytics template. So I've already done this for the most part, but maybe I want to change some of these. Like maybe I want my landscape to be a little bit cheaper. So I can come through here, change those values. And then I just need to remember to click save here at the top. And then when I close this out, because I didn't save this yet, it just reset, but that's fine. I'll put this back to gross building area and hard cost. And now I have all of those hard cost values updated actually in my whole model. I could go down every single one, update them all, and it would be all ready to go. And now that I have these two components, I'm ready to create my formula. So like we said before, the formula to calculate hard cost is my gross building area times my hard cost, right? So you can see each of these components gets assigned a letter. And that letter is what I'm going to use to reference that value in my formula. So my the way I calculate this is gross building area times hard cost. So I'm going to type in A times B. And that is going to calculate the result of the gross building area times hard cost. And I'm just going to save that. Oh, it lost all of this. Go back. Hard cost. There we go. So I can see a preview here of what my result will be. And I can also sort of flick through every element in my model and just check on the calculation. So I can make sure that the things that are being calculated are looking correct. A thing to note in Giraffe is the way that, I'm going to pop back to one that has a value on it. The way that these calculations work is it calculates this formula on every individual feature and then sums them together. So it will say this car park element, what is the hard cost times the area of that element? And then it'll take the next car park and do the same thing and then add them all together at the end. You can also do other things at the end, like you could calculate an average or get the minimum or maximum as well. But for the most part, sum is most likely what you want. So I'm just going to click Save Changes here. And now I have my hard cost value shown in my template. So the other costs that I'm going to include here are a soft cost, a contingency, and a purchase price. And these are going to be calculated in slightly different ways. So soft cost is actually going to be identical to hard cost, except I'm going to bring in the soft cost value under components. So I'm actually just going to open up the hard cost again and click duplicate. Rename this soft cost, change this to soft cost, and then save my changes. And then the next one I'm going to do is a contingency. Contingency in construction costs is typically around 10%. So what I'm going to do is add my hard and soft together. So I'm going to take the measures that I already created. You can see I changed this from property to measure, and that changes what I'm referencing here in this dropdown. So I'm going to grab my hard cost. I'm going to grab my soft cost. Name this contingency currency. And this is A plus B. I'm going to put it in parentheses so that adds first. And then I'm going to multiply that by 10% and save those changes. And then the last one I'm going to add is just a land purchase price. And this one, I'm just going to hard code this number in. Rather than doing this as a calculation, I'm just going to say, I know I purchased this land for $1 million or whatever. So in that case, I don't actually need a component. I'm just going to delete the components entirely. And I'm just going to type in a value and click save. And now I have these, this category all built out with all of these costs. Now, inside of each of these categories, I can also adjust things like how it displays and whether the elements subtotal. So if I want to make changes to the category itself, I can click on the category name and I can change things like the color. I like to make my costs a money color, so I just change that to green. And then I can add a display as well. And personally, I kind of like my costs to display as a pie chart. So I am going to include all of those values. And then I'm going to check both of these. I like seeing what the percentage is of the total, and I like seeing the sum total of all of the measures as well. So when I save this, it's going to change my display to give me a nice pie chart that shows sort of what the percentage is of each of these. When I mouse over it, it gives me the percent of the total. And then it gives me my total where it adds up all of these. So I just like the visual of this. You also have the option of doing a bar chart if that is useful for you. Cool. So the next thing we're going to calculate now is our incomes. So this is going to be similar to our costs. We're still pulling areas and properties from the model, but there's a couple of different ways to calculate income. So one way is through apartment rent. And again, this is going to be currency. And something that Giraffe does in the background is, if you remember when we looked at that usage for residential, there was an ability to set the price for each of those units. So one of the cool calculations Giraffe does in the background is a total price of all dwellings. So I'm going to search for that property. It's called dwelling total price. So I can see that here. And what I want to get a yearly budget here is to actually take my dwelling total price and multiply it by 12 to get my 12-month rental income for dwellings. So if I flip through here until I find a residence. So this is actually showing you exactly what's happening. It's looking for dwelling total price, but dwelling total price is not a property on any of these elements. There we go. So it's not calculating anything. That's why all of these are blank, because, PIN doesn't have a dwelling total price, but residential does. So this is taking the total price of all of the dwellings times my 12 months here. So I'm just going to save that. And I have my apartment rent. Another way to calculate incomes is perhaps a parking rent. And this is kind of a fun one where I can say, maybe I'm going to charge $300 per month for my parking spaces. So I'm going to get my parking bay count. And I am just going to hard code that number in here. And then I'm going to do times 12 to get my 12 months and click save. So there's my parking rent. And then one other way to calculate incomes is in your, retail or your commercial, you might have a net rent per square foot. So I'm going to do my commercial rent. My unit is again currency. But this one, I'm going to grab my net area, which is that efficiency times your gross square footage. That's one of the calculations that Giraffe just kind of does in the background for you. Plus, I'm going to add the component for net rent. And this is just A times B. And what I want to do here is make sure I add a filter because I want these rents to only be calculating on certain usages. So I'm actually going to filter this to only calculate on my usages that are commercial, retail, and large format retail. You could leave it to just calculate on anything that has a net rent value, but I want to be very specific about where I'm calculating net rent in this specific pro forma. I only want to calculate it on those commercial, large format retail, and retail, because I do have some elements in here that are community, that are amenity, and for my assumptions in this project, I don't want those included. So I'm going to filter to just these elements and then click save. So here are my my incomes in general. And I also want to get a total gross rent, which is all of these added together. Now, there are two ways that I could do that. I could create another measure that is, adding each of these together. And I could do A plus B plus C and get that calculation that way. But I think an easier way to do this is to just open up incomes, and I can then go into my settings and say, yes, I want to show my subtotals in my categories. So I'm just going to toggle that on. And once I do that, you're going to see that it created a subtotal for me automatically. So I didn't have to manually create that income subtotal. It's already being done in the background for me. So I find that really useful. I like using that toggle in the settings. All right, next section is our expenses. For this simple pro forma, my two expenses are going to be my operating expenses and my vacancy rate. And I'm doing both of those by just hard-coded rates. So I'm going to make both of these unit lists. And I'm just going to say my OPEX rate is maybe 25%. So I'm just going to type that in. And I'm going to do my vacancy rate. Again, unit lists. And I'm just going to say that this is 5%. And just type that in. Now you could put these in as percents, so they display as percents, but I just find the math easier if I just do decimals. So that's my personal my personal preference, but it's however you would prefer to do that in your projects. All right, so now let's calculate what our operating expenses are. I'm going to add another measure here. I have a question of how to change the format to percent. In my units, I would just select percent. And then instead of typing 0.05, I would just type 5. So that's how you do a percent. But I prefer doing it as decimals personally. So that's just how I'm going to do it today. All right, so my operating expenses are going to be my my rent, my incomes, times my operating expense rate. So I'm going to actually use another type of component here, and I'm going to grab the subtotal of my incomes as my component A. And my component B is going to be the, oh, yes, not subtotal. It's going to be measure, and it's going to be my OpEx rate. So I'm just going to do A times B, save that. And then my other expense is going to be my vacancy loss, I guess we could call it. Again, this is currency. Again, this is subtotal, and it's going to be my currency in incomes. And then my other component will be my measure, which is my vacancy rate times B. Perfect. So these are the expenses that I'm assuming. And you can see again, because I toggled on this calculate subtotal, it's already subtotaling this category as well. So that's really useful. And then the last section we're going to do is the feasibility. So there's a few different ways that you might calculate your sort of end value for your feasibility. So I'm going to do NOI, return on cost, and terminal value all as examples here today. But of course, build out your proforma template however works for you. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add in a cap rate. Again, my cap rate is just going to be a percent. And I'm going to say, just give myself a 5% cap rate. Just going to type that in there. And then the next one I'm going to calculate is my NOI, or my net operating income. And this one I'm going to take my subtotal of income and my expenses, my subtotal in expenses. So see why having those subtotals is really helpful. And this is going to be this is my net operating income for a year. Just save that. Oh, I didn't give it a unit. Haha. There we go. So there's my annual NOI. Then I'm going to also calculate my return on cost. And my return on cost is my total cost divided by my NOI. So this one again is going to be, this one is actually going to be a percent. So I'm going to grab my subtotal of costs and then my net operating income. And this is the is it A divided by B? Someone yell out in the chat if I'm doing this backwards. Yeah, this is, there we go. So then my return on cost is looking like about 16%. And then my last calculation here is going to be my terminal value. And terminal value is your cap rate times your net operating income. So I'm going to bring in my cap rate, and I'm going to bring in my net operating income. Give it a currency. And there we go. So I've got sort of three different ways of calculating what my feasibility could be on this project as sort of back of the napkin calculations. And now what's cool is I have this analytics template. All of these numbers are currently being calculated for this entire project. But my partner in crime here, Adam, did a really nice job of setting up this project in sort of almost neighborhoods or sections or precincts, I guess you could call them, and he organized them by group. So I want to split my calculations and see what this looks like area by area. My civic center is going to have some differences from my mid-rise residential. So what I can do in analytics now is group my entire report by layer group. And it's going to split all of these numbers by the layer groups that are set up here. And I can come in here in settings and I'm going to hide some groups that I don't care about. So there's no layer group. There's things that are in there that aren't on a layer group. Don't need to include that in my calculation. So I'm just going to take that out. And now I can see all of my values. So I can see for instance, my terminal value for civic center versus mid-rise residential is obviously going to be different numbers. So this gives you a really interesting look, especially useful if you're doing options, for instance. So right now we're looking at this as each layer group is a different section of the same project. But you could also imagine each layer group being a different version of the project, and you can compare side by side what is my return for this version versus this version. So I really love being able to split my analytics up by different values to get those results. So now that we have my analytics template built out, probably want to reuse this again, right? It's, it took a little bit of work. It took about, I would say, 40 minutes to put this together. So I want to make sure that I capitalize on that 40 minutes and I don't have to do this every time. So there's a couple of ways to do that. One way to do that is if I am in a project and I say, hey, I remember that I did all of these calculations on another project. I'd really like to include them in this one. I can pop over to my analytics, and this is what your sort of blank slate analytics looks like if I don't have anything in the project. And you can see that I have the option to import from another project. So I'm going to select that import. I'm going to search for the project I want to import from. And then I can select specific calculations or the entire thing if I want. So for this, I'm just going to select everything, import all 33 calculations, and then it's going to ask me, do I want to overwrite the usages in this project or not? If you want to get all of the assumptions that you stored in that analytics project, yes, overwrite the usages. If you don't, keep the usages in your current project, but know that your values are going to be calculated based on the usages in your current project. So in this case, I'm going to do keep existing because I want to keep whatever my hard costs and soft costs and all of those assumptions that I stored in here already. And now all of those calculations and my tabs have been imported into this project. And as soon as I start drawing something, my numbers are going to start filling out. So this works very similarly to urban, where as you draw and adjust, your numbers update live for you. So this is really just customizing what your metrics are in your project. And obviously that is incredibly useful for all of your projects. So that's the first way that you can reuse those analytics that you created in that project, just using that project import. Another way is to turn that project into a template. So what I would recommend if you're going to turn this project into a template is go take a look at a previous webinar I've done that's on building out your template and see everything that you should store in a template. So that would be all of your assumptions and analytics, all of your favorite data layers that you want to see in every project, maybe some styling that you want to reuse over and over again. There's lots of things that you can store in a template. But once you have all of that set up and you want your analytics to be saved in that template as well, you can just come over to the project settings for that project and click use as template. And this gives you the option to share this template with just yourself. If you are an administrator for any teams in your workspace, you can share it with a team. And if you are a workspace administrator, you can share it with the entire workspace. And then what happens is once you select that you want to share it with your entire workspace, they will see it when they go to create a new project. So I'm just going to refresh here so that I make sure that it shows up in the UI. And then when I go to new project, I'm going to see that template in my list. And then when I click on that template, it's going to start me a new blank project, but it's going to include all of the assumptions from that template project. So I've got all of my analytics. You can see I've also got all of the layers that were already set up in that template project. So everything is ready to go for me. So that is my presentation today. We started out by looking at Giraffe usages and discussing about how that's where all of your assumptions are stored for all of your different building and any geometry types in Giraffe. And then we dove right into analytics and we took a look at how to create different types of calculations, how to use the different components to create formulas, and how to build all of that towards having a feasibility template that gives us the information that we need as we draw. And then once we were happy with our analytics template, we shared it with our team as an actual project template so that that knowledge that is stored in our head no longer has to be stored in our head. Now everyone in our team has access to it, and it automatically just gives them that live feedback as they draw and design. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today to learn about how to build a proforma in Giraffe. And we have a few more minutes, so I'm happy to hang out here. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or just type in the chat and I can answer you live. So I am just going to stop the recording and I'll be here to answer any questions as we go. Thanks.